Welcome to Exchanging Notes, the interviews. Today I have the privilege of conversing with novelist Dennis Bock. Approaching an artist who is as simply complicated as Dennis Bock, it's probably easiest to say something intellectually facile and stick him into the closest box. So that's what I'll do. I will tell you that Dennis Bock's intricately structured storylines provide the foundation for exploration of the individual, standing in the shadows of history, but Dennis Bock is not an historian. He is interested in the things we have chosen to forget, the complexities of the human psyche that are often subsumed by the deluge of history. That's the box. And there's so much more that I approached this interview fearing that I actually know very little of the gentleman sitting to my right, except that he is at the center of a very well articulated literary aesthetic and body of work. And we're going to find out about that, I guess. Dennis Bock, welcome to Exchanging Those
Thank you very much.
Thank you for dropping in.
Thank you for coming, you guys. Thank you very much.
Let's start off with you. You were born on August the 28th, 1964 in Belleville, Ontario. Can I start with your parents? Tell me about your parents. What did your mother do?
My mother, like many women of her generation, raised children and was, at the same time, kind of, I guess, conflicted by the sacrifices that she had to make because she had to leave behind dreams of an artistic career.
Was she a visual artist?
She is a visual artist. She's a fiber artist, which means she harvests, collects, and prepares, and spins and dyes wool and that sort of thing. Anything that you can sort of feel tactile, like threads and fabrics and so on. She makes lovely things with them.
Now, your father, what sort of career did he follow?
My dad's a carpenter.
A carpenter?
Yeah. In the early days, he was a shipbuilder in Kingston. When after the very beginning in Germany, they came from Germany in '55. Before he left, he came to Canada. He was an accordion and drum teacher and shoemaker, and he came here to Kingston, and he learned his trade in Kingston, building cabinetry for ships, for boats.
Really? You said they came to Canada in
1955. They came separately, like 8 months after my mom came. Yeah.
What were generally the circumstances of their leaving? Were there circumstances
I think
forcing
they
them?
were very young, in their early 20s, and Germany was post-war and still in ruins economically, and Canada was one of the countries that offered a new beginning, right, economically.
I've got the idea that you've got a very interesting family tree. Your name, Bock, comes from 13th century German, refers to a ram or a billy goat.
Yeah, that's what they told me.
Have you followed your family tree back far
No,
enough?
no, not far enough, because my dad was adopted.
Okay.
Yeah, he was orphaned, and so.
Under what circumstances?
He didn't know his biological mother.
Okay.
At the time, and so he was adopted and took the name of his adopted parents. So there's no connection to the billy goat thing. Although when I was a kid, people loved to make fun of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You studied English literature and philosophy at University of Western Ontario. I'd like to talk more about the English literature part later on, but philosophy. Who were the philosophers who attracted you, and what sort of ideas did they have that attracted you?
Well, you got me there because I was definitely more interested in the English literature aspect of it. The philosophy, I'm gonna admit that I'm not a great philosopher. I'm not a great student. I took philosophy because it was something that I could handle instead of taking a science degree. But yeah, no, I mean, I read the philosophers, but I really spent most of my time thinking about how to put stories together.
In university, what were when English literature? Who were the writers that attracted you?
Well, I guess I met the work of Alice Munro for the first time in first year university, and her work was introduced to me by James Rainey, who was a great poet and playwright, and really sort of was interested in helping articulate the 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 unspoken in southwestern Ontario. Really interested in developing characters in locations that were familiar to him as a young man in Ontario, and he talked a lot about that vernacular, Ontario vernacular, and real people, and brought Alice Munro's work to my attention for the same reason, right? I mean, she's so well known as one of the first champions of real people in settings that people in southwestern Ontario know intimately. And so she was one of the first writers who I read that helped me understand that I could write about things in my own backyard rather than having to, make up stories that happened in Paris or something like that.
Which other writers, two or three other writers, touch you profoundly on a personal level, or provide you with a paradigm of the novel that you can look at and say, this is one way of doing it?
Well, I think the first novel that I read with the understanding that was the product of one person's imagination was Gulliver's Travels. And I was in high school or so, I was like in grade 10 or something. And I'd read novels before, but this one really came to me with the understanding that somebody had made this out of their ingenuity and imagination, rather than just having it exist, preformed. And so I saw Gulliver's Travels for the first time as an artifact of the imagination, rather than just something that was, sort of existed for all time.
Were you also attracted to its political implications?
No,
Jonathan Swift as really a pamphleteer.
Yeah, no, I didn't get that at the time. It was just a marvelous act of the imagination that was so intricately drawn and believable that it just sort of, it took me away.
After University of Western Ontario, you lived for 4 years in Madrid. You finished Olympia there, which came out in 1998. Is there a genesis of Olympia? Was it always there, or was there a moment where you said, I'm going to write a book and I think it's going to be about this?
Yeah, no, well, I do remember when it all kind of came together. I think it was 1995 or something. I went to the Banff writing studio, I guess it was called back then, and I had maybe 4 or 5 stories, and they were all kind of loosely, very, very loosely connected. I was doing my own sort of version of the Alice Munro, my own backyard kind of thing, and I was surrounded by 17 other writers who were kind of like, we were all in our early stages of writing, and trying to tell our own stories, and so, this writer was, came from this background, and that writer came from that, and we all sort of talked about, learning to not only accept, our own limitations culturally, linguistically, racially, whatever it was, but to apply them to our own work, right? And to sort of like find strength within our personal subjective experiences. And so I had a bunch of those stories, and they were all kind of loosely connected by, there's like German immigrant families hovering around. And then I, just by chance, a film was playing at the Banff Center, and it was The Life and Times of Leni Riefenstahl. And it was a bio of her life. And at the time, I guess she was like 95 years old or something. And she spoke about her ideas of the artist as having no connection to their social or political context. She argued that, I don't know if maybe some of you don't know who she is. She made Triumph of the Will and Olympia, which glorified the Third Reich, the Hitler regime, and so on. And she was accused, rightly, I suppose, at the end of her, or after the war, of pandering to and creating, pro-Nazi propaganda. And she said, "Well, no, I'm just an artist. I'm not interested in politics. I just made aesthetically beautiful documentaries." And so she went to the grave with that argument, and she made it like really earnestly. I don't know if it was all just a manipulation and a lie, but I was really intrigued by a brilliant artist who could take that position. And I ended up using her as a character in my book to weave together the stories that I had been writing, and I continued to write to make my book called Olympia.
Your final sentence in Olympia is, we'd seen miracles this day. I knew this is where I belonged, here with my people, among the living. Is that a conclusion you came to gradually, or is that one you were always knew you were working toward?
Well, I guess, it's easy to fall prey to cynicism and, negativity, I suppose. And I think my job, I guess, as a writer and as a parent and as an individual, to work harder for the positive aspects in your life. It's easy and convenient to just sort of lie down and let history wash over you or fate wash over you. So I guess it's a bit of a testament to the spirit of the narrator who is determines to be a stronger person and to live within his own limitations.
Is that cynicism somehow bound up with your preoccupation with repetition? William Burroughs said in the Forward to Naked Lunch, he said that I repeat words that indicate space-time juxtaposition, a point of intersection between levels and experience. You're very big on repeating images, and of course the idea of repetition is big in Western thought, going from Freud to Kierkegaard. Does our inability to end the repetition of history, is that where your cynicism possibly comes from?
I don't think so. I mean, I used the motif of water, for example, in Olympia, is there. The motif of patterning is there in the Ash Garden. The patterns that the scarring, the female Emiko, the victim, the bomb victim, wears on her skin and so on. I was at that stage in my writing. I was attracted to motif as a way of drilling down into an idea, of establishing a visual and creating it helped sort of, in my mind at the time, it helped deepen and create a richer texture to the text. I hoped it did at the time. I don't do that anymore, but it was something that I used because it pleased me.
Well, you do something that I refer to as a coda image. You give us a scene, and then you give us an image at the end. For example, when Ruby and Peter are floating away on all the water from the pool, there is an image at the end of the grandfather dying from a buildup of fluids in his lungs. And this imagery tells us to go back to the scene and see the scene through the lens of this image, and kind of relates in a metonymic way to the scene we've just gone through. Is that a very conscious device for you?
Well, I don't think we're ever only in one place at one time in our lives. I think, your imagination, your mind is always making connections with the past, projecting into the future and so on. And I think my characters do that as well. There's, an inner landscape that they occupy and that I try to develop and enrich as much as I can as a writer. So I rarely stay in one moment purely on the surface, because there's always something else going on. As we sit here having this conversation, I mean, who knows where our minds are buzzing at the same time, right? So it's an attempt to create depth and texture, I think, in the landscape, in the interior landscape that the characters are occupying.
Let's talk about, you have a section called Golem in Olympia. Golem is an animated anthropomorphic being. In the Psalms, the word galmi, my golem, meaning my unshaped form, connotes man as an unfinished being. What is the significance of the golem to you?
To me, it doesn't really have a significance. The story takes place in 1973 and in Germany. The narrator visits his old uncle's farm, and there are secrets in the house, right? There's an uncomfortable Nazi overtone that sort of shadows the family, and I suppose the golem is a figure of foreboding, of danger, of menace that haunts the narrator's imagination.
You mentioned the water very quickly. Is that conscious? Did you look at it at the end and say, "Man, there's a lot of water in here"? Did it just appear?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's something I was interested in sort of like establishing that motif, repeated image, and I just liked it. I mean, I don't do that anymore. It was
Yeah.
something that attracted me as a writer, and I don't know why. I mean, writers do things that I mean, we play with our text and build our text up as much as we can, and hopefully in an interesting way. And I was into that on a literal physical level. I mean, there's a lot of water because there are sailors and swimmers and that sort of thing. Water is I don't think very heavily in terms of symbolism, but water can be used to symbolize purity and change and whatever. But I sort of I applied that imagery sort of gradually over time. If there are any writers interested in I don't know, newish or beginning writers here, I would caution the use of imagery as a structuring device, because usually it doesn't work. Stick with story and plot and character. But it's a way of sort of adding a bit of texture, I think, for me at the time anyway. That was just very